The Ravens' master plan has finally been revealed. Eric DeCosta just pulled back the curtain on how Baltimore is approaching the 26-27 season, and while he didn't announce a blockbuster move or a major signing, his latest interview shows us exactly where the team is heading into training camp. From unanswered questions at the center position, to potential trades, to major injury updates on players such as Matabike and Buchanan, and other young players who are notable and forcing their way into the conversation going into this upcoming season, Eric DeCosta just showed us a glimpse on Baltimore's plan for the future and why I believe the Baltimore Ravens have several pieces that could lead them to another Super Bowl run going into 2027. But before we get into today's video, you guys are going to want to make sure to subscribe to Ravens Digest. Thank you all for 500 subscribers. We have hit our goal and now are on the road to 1K. It is completely free, there's no cost at all, and we're providing Ravens videos and updates every single day. You guys are not going to want to miss on the content that we're providing you guys at all. Now, going into the 2026-2027 season, one of the biggest questions on the master plan for the Baltimore Ravens is all specifically allocated towards the offensive line. Offensive line is one of the key positions, especially with the loss, as we've talked about in previous videos, with Tyler Linderbaum leaving the center position. Linderbaum was one of the best centers in football and one of the true leaders on Baltimore's O-line. And losing him isn't just purely based on blocking, it's also based on communication, protection calls, and keeping the O-line organized as a whole. Now, the current competition that we have is between Danny Pinter, Carson Gwynn, and notable third rounder Corey Bullock. Eric DeCosta mentioned all three of these centers in the interview, but the one name that kept returning in this specific interview was Danny Pinter, and Danny Pinter was the name that DeCosta mentioned and referenced the most. Pinter brings NFL experience and versatility, which matters at a position that requires you to communicate so needably with your quarterback. And however, DeCosta didn't truly close the door on adding someone outside of the building, but Pinter brings NFL experience and versatility and is a true piece that we could rely on if we do not make the trade or a trade piece towards getting another center or another offensive line piece. The bigger picture with this is that Baltimore isn't looking for a very flashy name who can play center. They just need somebody who can protect for Lamar Jackson, communicate protections with Lamar, and keep the offense operating at a high level and not be detrimental to the offensive line and other members around the team. If nobody separates themselves during training camp, the Baltimore Ravens have shown that they are willing to explore every option when it comes to being able to look for a trade or anything in this substance. Now, the Baltimore Ravens and the biggest thing for Eric DeCosta that he revealed wasn't just about players purely competing for their jobs. As we've talked about, the Ravens move constantly behind the scenes, and they have a great scouting team that helps find elite players throughout time and time again. Fans usually don't see or talk about this, but for EDC and the Ravens front office, this is one of the busiest evaluation periods of the year going into training camp. There are scouts from all over the country who come to watch, and Baltimore scouts are not just watching their entire roster, they're also studying the entire NFL. They evaluate potential trade targets, veterans who could become available, players who could be released, positions that Baltimore could need help in, and this is a huge reason why Baltimore and the Ravens are rarely caught off guard when it comes to this sense. They gather information on these opportunities before they even happen, and the bigger picture is that EDC does not make moves because a fan wants a move. He waits until the value is right and makes sure that he's not giving up enough to where the team should be lacking in the future. The process goes as this: evaluating your roster, identifying the weaknesses within the roster, monitoring the league, and making a move where the opportunity appears and it makes sense. The center position, as we know, is a perfect example of this, and with Baltimore liking its current options, the scouting department has been looking and watching two options that could become available. Now, the reason that Baltimore can afford to stay patient is because they believe that they have better ways to go about evaluating the staff during the 2026-2027 season lead-up. One of the biggest things regarding this is DeCosta speaking about how NFL teams have changed their approach towards preseason games. One of the most valuable factors going into preseason games now are joint practices. Joint practices have become very valuable, and DeCosta stated that the trend has been towards having multiple joint practices so they can practice with their starters with live fire, but in a controlled setting. Why does this matter completely? Preseason games do not always provide a true evaluation on a player, especially since the NFL has changed the preseason total from 5 games and 4 games to 3 games. Starters can only play a few snaps as you don't want to create injuries within the system, and teams cannot always control what they can see in these situations. Joint practices for Baltimore allow them to evaluate offensive line, real pass coverage, and pass rushes, as well as receivers, starting corners, defensive backs versus NFL offenses in learning that system, and coaches can repeat important situations throughout these practices, such as red downs, red zone situations, 2-minute offense drills, and other situations where they could benefit from getting live reps over and over again. The Ravens want as much information as possible before making that final 53-man roster cut, before missing out on any beneficial or key pieces that could have a great season going into 2026-2027 season. And as we've talked about, while Baltimore has been evaluating their newest pieces, they know that the ceiling is pretty much determined by players and their best players on the team. One of the biggest updates, specifically from this interview, was none other than Nnamdi Madubuike, one of Baltimore's most important players on the entire defense. Before his injury, he established himself as one of the best interior defensive linemen, not only just in football and for the Baltimore Ravens, but in the entire NFL. He became a player that offenses had to specifically game plan for when it comes to his pressure on the quarterback. He pretty much was told by DeCosta that he was trending in the right direction, and DeCosta had stated that the Baltimore Ravens have to have more information involving his injury and his timeline in the next 2 to 3 weeks. If Madubuike returns in the next 2 to 3 weeks, Baltimore will start to ramp him up slowly and create a comfortable situation for him to be a beneficial piece going into training camp and the entire outlook on the season upcoming. Why does this matter so much? The Ravens cannot afford to rush Madubuike back from his injury. They need him healthy for the entire season if Baltimore wants to make that push towards going to a Super Bowl. Now, a healthy Madubuike doesn't only help himself, it also helps Trey Hendrickson, the newest acquisition, to get more one-on-one opportunities, as well as Mike Green to develop within that young O-line without having to carry the entire defensive line. Madubuike's health, as we know, could determine the ceiling of Anthony Weaver's new defense, the new defensive coordinator for the Baltimore Ravens. And with all of these healthy pieces back, he could have a very beneficial defensive communication to be a great and high-level defense going into 2026-2027. But Madubuike's injury update was important. Eric DeCosta also gave us another update involving a high-level player of Teddy Buchanan, and he entered the offseason recovering from an injury from last season. Baltimore drafted him last year due to his athleticism and his ability to make plays and play multiple roles. DeCosta stated that he is in top 1% of recovery and should be ready to go very shortly. This is extremely high praise from the GM of DeCosta, and DeCosta has seen countless players go through rehab and talk through them and work within them to getting them back to their healthy self. Baltimore has been impressed by the way that Buchanan has played throughout the first couple of years of his NFL career, and he builds the mold of a modern linebacker with his speed, his coverage ability, and the way that he can range from a sideline perspective. As well as this, if Buchanan can return healthy, he gives Anthony Weaver another versatile piece to rely on this defense. But one of the pieces I'm really excited about going into this upcoming season involve none other than wide receiver LaJohntay Wester. Wester is becoming impossible to ignore, and from EDC's point of view, he's very impressed as he brought him up himself. He quoted that behind Zay Flowers in a lot of packages, his looks have pretty much improved, and it seems as if he can make a significant jump, not only in the return game, but in the offensive room going into year 2. Last season, Wester's biggest impact, as we know, came through special teams, but now the Baltimore Ravens are looking to include him in many other offensive packages. Being mentioned behind Zay Flowers means that those opportunities are being earned through practice and in training camp, and Baltimore needs more production in this receiver room as a whole. If Wester continues to improve going into the season, he could be one of the biggest breakout players on this entire roster going into 2026-27. And Wester was not only the young player that was spoken about in this specific interview. As we know, the Baltimore Ravens have a lot of young pieces that could be developed over the course of the next years. The Baltimore Ravens' main development has been circulating on the offensive line with rookie from last year, HBCU graduate Carson Vincent. Carson Vincent had entered Baltimore as a developmental offensive tackle, and the expectation is that he would need time before becoming a contributor. DeCosta stated in his interview that he has great strides and could be a very effective left tackle in this league if he keeps developing his form and his mechanics on the offensive line during training camp and going into the 2026-27 season. This matters because left tackle is one of the hardest positions to find in the NFL. And Baltimore has been known for developing offensive linemen, and Vincent's development could be a long-term answer towards shifting and moving around pieces in the offensive line in the event that the Baltimore Ravens do not go out and make a trade for another piece of this nature. Another young player, but a very Super Bowl experienced player that the Baltimore Ravens had acquired in free agency this last season was no other than Jaylinn Hawkins from the New England Patriots, Super Bowl appearance last year and starting safety for the team. Now, with Baltimore and Jaylinn Hawkins, he was another offseason addition mentioned by DeCosta, and he has been a reliable starter and a playmaker for the New England Patriots and is looking to build this promising career with the Baltimore Ravens. This matters due to multiple things of him being able to space the floor, but he gives another safety option alongside Kyle Hamilton and Malachi Starks, which we know are both two prominent pieces on the Baltimore Ravens defense. Baltimore can use Hamilton as his chess piece and use Hawkins and Malachi Starks in multiple different ways to discuss coverages and make it effective for the Baltimore Ravens to be a nice secondary going into the 2026-2027 season. But last but not least, the Baltimore Ravens, as we know, have been in discussions with number one receiver on the team, Zay Flowers, in terms of getting a massive extension done for a long-term deal. One of the biggest long-term questions facing Baltimore is whether they decide to extend Zay Flowers, and I think it's a no-brainer, obviously, with Flowers becoming one of the most important pieces on the Baltimore Ravens roster. Since going into 2022 and 2024 with he brings, as we know, his elite quickness, route running ability, and his yak catch. Eric DeCosta specifically said that he is pretty hopeful that a deal will be done. And if we know Eric DeCosta from previous, Baltimore does not really discuss their contract negotiations from a public perspective. The Ravens often reward their stars and believe that the foundational pieces on the team should be kept within and without. The wide receiver market has exploded in the NFL, and Zay Flowers should be paid what he deserves, and we should continue to build the receiver room with him and continue to build towards the quest of a championship. Now, when you put this all together and you see the Ravens' master plan, Baltimore isn't really rushing decisions. They're making moves not just to make moves. They're developing young guys, getting their veterans healthy, and keeping an eye on the rest of the league and trusting the process within the system and within the organization. EDC didn't reveal a move, but he also revealed the blueprint of the Baltimore Ravens trying to build this championship roster, and with the pieces already in place, Baltimore is now focused on every single one of them, making sure they are ready for their opportunity when that time comes. Now, I want to hear from you guys. What is the biggest part of the Ravens master plan going into 2026-27? Is finding an answer at center the most important, or is it getting Madubuike healthy, or is it making sure that these young players that we had drafted, such as the Westers or the Vincents, become a breakout star? Let me know what you guys think in the comments, and if you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to Ravens Digest, it is completely free, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the latest Ravens news, analysis, and rumors. The Baltimore Ravens aren't just building for week 1, we're building for January and February. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next video of Ravens Digest.